The sleek black Bentley purred to a stop in front of Blackwood Manor as storm clouds gathered overhead, casting the imposing estate in shades of grey that matched Marcus Blackwood's mood. He'd cut his London business trip short by 3 days, a decision that would have shocked his associates, who knew him as a man who never deviated from his carefully planned schedules. Marcus stepped out of the car, his 6'3" frame moving with the fluid grace that marked him as more than human. Even in his perfectly tailored Italian suit, there was something wild about him, the way his dark hair caught the wind, the predatory stillness in his amber eyes, the barely contained power that made lesser beings step aside without conscious thought. "That will be all, James," he told his driver, his voice carrying the natural authority of an alpha. "Take the weekend off." The older man nodded respectfully. "Very good, sir. Shall I inform Mrs. Carson of your early arrival?" "No." Marcus's response was sharp, almost curt. The last thing he wanted was his housekeeper fussing over him. He needed solitude, needed to think about the deal that had gone sour in London and the growing unrest in his pack territories. "I'll see myself in." As the Bentley disappeared down the winding drive, Marcus stood for a moment in the gathering dusk, breathing in the familiar sense of his land, pine, earth, and the faint musk that marked his territory. His wolf stirred restlessly beneath his skin, as it had been doing for months now. Something was coming. He could feel it in his bones. The manor loomed before him, its Georgian architecture elegant and imposing. Lights glowed in a few windows, the kitchen, where his small staff would be finishing dinner preparations, and... Marcus frowned. A light flickered in his private study on the second floor. No one was supposed to be in that room. Ever. It contained too many packed documents, too many secrets that could endanger them all if they fell into the wrong hands. His wolf snarled to the surface, bringing with it the enhanced senses that made him one of the most feared alphas on the East Coast. He scented the air more carefully, and his frown deepened. Someone was definitely in his study, and that someone carried a scent he recognized. Elena. His Omega maid shouldn't be anywhere near his private sanctuary. Elena Rosewood had worked at the manor for nearly 5 years, ever since her mother's death had left her alone and desperate for employment. She was quiet, efficient, and had the rare gift of being nearly invisible when she worked, a quality he appreciated in his staff. She knew her place and kept to it. So what the hell was she doing in his study? Marcus entered through the front door, his footsteps silent on the marble floor. The house felt different somehow, charged with an energy that made his skin prickle. He climbed the curved staircase 2 steps at a time, his hand already reaching for the study door when he heard it. A child's voice, soft and sleepy. "Mama, when will Papa come home?" Marcus froze, his hand on the brass doorknob. A child? There were no children at Blackwood Manor. There had never been children here, not since. He pushed the thought away and eased the door open, staying in the shadows of the doorway. What he saw made his world tilt on its axis. Elena sat in his leather chair behind his massive oak desk, her long chestnut hair falling like a curtain around a small figure curled in her lap. She was humming softly, a lullaby he vaguely remembered from his own childhood, her slender fingers stroking through hair that caught the lamplight like spun silver. The child was perhaps 4 years old, small and delicate in the way of Omega children, wearing a simple pink nightgown that had seen better days. But it wasn't her size that made Marcus's breath catch in his throat. It was her hair. Pure silver, like moonlight on snow. The same rare trait that had marked the Blackwood bloodline for generations. "Shoo, sweetheart," Elena whispered, her voice carrying the gentle cadence that made every alpha protective instinct in Marcus flare to life. "Sleep now. Everything will be all right." The little girl, Sophie, his mind supplied without him knowing how, shifted in Elena's arms, and Marcus caught a glimpse of her face. Heart-shaped and innocent, with features that would one day be beautiful. But it was her eyes that stopped his heart. Amber eyes. His eyes, staring back at him from a face too young to understand the implications of their color. Marcus stepped into the room, no longer caring about stealth. The floorboard creaked under his weight, and Elena's head snapped up, her dark eyes wide with terror. She clutched the child closer, her entire body going rigid with the instinctive fear of an Omega caught by an Alpha in a compromising position. Marcus. His name left her lips in a breathless whisper. You're home early. He could scent her now, the sweet Omega fragrance that had always made his wolf pace restlessly, overlaid with something fiercer, more primal. Maternal protection, fierce and unyielding, mixed with the natural submission that was bred into her bones. The combination was intoxicating and dangerous. Yes, he said softly, his voice carrying the weight of alpha authority that made weaker wolves submit. I am. And you're in my study, Elena. My private study. She flinched but didn't lower her eyes, a show of defiance that surprised him. I can explain. Can you? Marcus stepped closer, his gaze fixed on the child in her arms. Sophie had awakened at the sound of his voice, those impossible amber eyes focusing on him with an intelligence that seemed far too old for her young face. Because I'm very interested in hearing that explanation. Elena's arms tightened protectively around Sophie, and the little girl reached up to pat her cheek with a tiny hand. Don't be scared, Mama, she whispered, loud enough for Marcus to hear. He won't hurt us. Mama. The word hit him like a physical blow. This child called Elena Mama, but she had his eyes, his bloodline's distinctive coloring. Which meant. Who is she? The question came out harsher than he'd intended, carried on a growl that made Elena shrink back in the chair. Her name is Sophie, Elena said quietly, her voice steady despite the fear he could sense rolling off her in waves. That's not what I asked. Marcus moved around the desk until he was standing directly in front of them, close enough to see the pulse beating frantically at Elena's throat, close enough to catch the complex mix of scents that surrounded them both. Who is her father, Elena? He let alpha command creep into his voice, the irresistible compulsion that no Omega could resist. Elena's face went pale, and for a moment he thought she might faint. But instead of the immediate compliance he expected, she lifted her chin and met his eyes directly. The defiance in that gesture sent heat spiraling through his veins, straight to parts of his anatomy that had no business responding to his employee. You should know, Alpha, she whispered, her voice barely audible but carrying words that stopped his world cold. You were there that night 5 years ago. The study fell silent except for the ticking of the antique clock on the mantelpiece and the soft sound of Sophie's breathing. Marcus stared at Elena, his mind reeling as memories he'd buried deep began to surface. 5 years ago. The night of Isabella's funeral. The night he'd lost himself in grief and... No, he breathed, but even as he denied it, he could see the truth written in every line of Sophie's perfect face, in the way she watched him with curious amber eyes that were mirrors of his own. Elena said nothing, just held his daughter, Christ, his daughter, and waited for his world to either crumble or reshape itself around this impossible truth. Outside, thunder rolled across the darkening sky, as if the very heavens were responding to the moment that would change everything for the Alpha of the East Coast Pack. Everything he thought he knew about his life, his carefully controlled existence, had just shattered like glass at his feet. And sitting in his chair, holding the proof of a night he'd tried so hard to forget, was the one woman who had the power to bring him to his knees. Chapter 2. The silence stretched between them like a taut wire, broken only by the soft patter of rain against the study windows. Marcus stood frozen, his amber eyes locked on Elena's face as her words echoed in his mind. You were there that night 5 years ago. 5 years ago. The night that had nearly destroyed him. That's impossible, he said finally, his voice rough with denial. But even as the words left his mouth, memories began to surface, fragments he'd buried so deep he'd almost convinced himself they were dreams. Elena shifted Sophie in her arms, the little girl having dozed off again with the resilience of childhood. Is it? She asked quietly, and there was something in her tone, not accusation, but a weary acceptance that made his chest tighten. You don't remember? Marcus turned away, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. Of course he remembered. How could he forget the worst night of his life? The night he'd buried his wife and lost himself so completely that he'd... Isabella's funeral, he whispered, the words torn from somewhere deep inside him. Yes. The single word hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Marcus closed his eyes, and suddenly he was there again, standing in his formal black suit beside an open grave, watching them lower Isabella's coffin into the earth while rain fell from a gray October sky. 5 years ago. The reception had been endless, a parade of pack members and business associates offering condolences he didn't want to hear, speaking about a woman they'd never truly known. Isabella had been the perfect Alpha's maid on the surface, beautiful, sophisticated, from an impeccable bloodline, but their marriage had been more political alliance than love match. He'd escaped to the gardens as soon as politeness would allow, needing air, needing space, needing to be anywhere but in that house full of people who expected him to grieve properly for a wife he'd barely known. The moon had been full that night, and his wolf had been restless, pacing beneath his skin like a caged animal. He'd found himself in the rose garden behind the manor, the same garden where Isabella had spent her afternoons painting watercolors she'd never shown anyone. He'd been standing there, surrounded by the ghosts of a marriage that had never been real, when he'd heard the soft sound of weeping. Elena had been kneeling beside the small memorial stone that marked her mother's grave, Margaret Rosewood, who had been head housekeeper at Blackwood Manor for 30 years before a sudden heart attack claimed her just 2 weeks before Isabella's accident. In his own grief, Marcus had barely acknowledged the loss of the woman who had helped raise him after his parents died. She'd looked so small, so broken, in her simple black dress. Her chestnut hair had come loose from its pins, falling around her shoulders like a silk curtain, and the moonlight had turned her tears to silver tracks on her cheeks. Elena. Her name had left his lips before he'd realized he was going to speak. She'd startled, scrambling to her feet and wiping hastily at her face. Alpha Blackwood. I'm sorry, I didn't know you were. I can go. No. The word had come out sharper than he'd intended, carried on a growl that made her freeze. Don't go. He'd moved closer then, drawn by something he couldn't name. Grief, maybe, or the way the moonlight caught in her dark eyes. She'd smelled like jasmine and sorrow, her omega scent calling to something primal in his wolf. I'm sorry about your mother, he'd said, the words inadequate but sincere. She was. Margaret was a good woman. She loved working here, Elena had whispered, her voice thick with tears. She said the Blackwoods were the finest family she'd ever served. Even after Papa left us, she never complained. Never asked for anything. They'd stood there in the moonlight, 2 broken souls finding solace in shared grief. He couldn't remember who had moved first, maybe they'd both stepped forward at the same time, drawn together by loss and loneliness and the strange comfort of not being alone with their pain. When he'd touched her face, wiping away a tear with his thumb, she'd leaned into the caress like a flower turning toward the sun. Her skin had been so soft, so warm, and the way she'd looked at him, not with the careful deference she usually showed, but with something raw and real and utterly human. Marcus, she'd whispered, his name on her lips for the first time without his title, and something in his chest had cracked wide open. He'd kissed her then, tasting salt and sorrow and something sweeter underneath. She'd kissed him back with a desperation that matched his own, her hands fisting in his shirt as if she was afraid he might disappear. What happened next had been inevitable, written in the pull of the full moon and the grief that had stripped away all their careful boundaries. They'd made love in the rose garden with a passion that had nothing to do with alpha and omega dynamics and everything to do with 2 people finding comfort in each other's arms. Afterward, she'd fallen asleep curled against his chest, and he'd held her while the moon tracked across the sky, feeling more at peace than he had in months. But when dawn had come, reality had crashed back down on him like a weight. She was his employee. An omega with no pack protection, no family except a mother who'd just died. He was the alpha of the largest pack on the East Coast, still reeling from his wife's death, with responsibilities that stretched far beyond his own desires. So he'd left her sleeping in the garden and retreated to his study, telling himself it had been a moment of madness brought on by grief. When she'd returned to work the next day, they'd both pretended it had never happened. But now... Marcus? Elena's voice pulled him back to the present, and he opened his eyes to find her watching him with an expression he couldn't read. Sophie was still asleep in her arms, one small hand tangled in Elena's hair. I remember, he said roughly, his voice barely above a whisper. God help me, I remember all of it. Something flickered in her eyes, relief, maybe, or vindication. I tried to tell you, she said softly. When I found out I was pregnant, I tried so many times to find the words. But you were always so busy, so distant, and I was just the maid. The pain in her voice cut through him like a blade. Elena. Do you know what it's like, she continued, her voice gaining strength, to carry a child and know that her father can never acknowledge her? To watch her grow and see your eyes looking back at me every day? To know that she has a birthright, a family, a legacy, but she can never claim any of it because of who I am? Marcus felt something crack inside his chest, a fissure that spread outward like a web. Why didn't you leave? Go somewhere else, start over? Elena looked down at Sophie, smoothing the little girl's silver hair with gentle fingers. Where would I go? I have no family, no money except what I earn here. And this is her home, even if she can never really belong to it. I wanted her to grow up knowing where she came from, even if it was from a distance. You named her Sophie. He didn't know why that detail seemed important, but it was. It means wisdom, Elena said quietly. I hoped she'd be wiser than her parents. That she'd find a way to bridge the worlds that divided us. Sophie stirred in her arms, those amber eyes fluttering open to focus on Marcus with startling intensity. Are you my papa? She asked with the directness of childhood, and Marcus felt his knees go weak. Before he could answer, the sound of footsteps echoed in the hallway outside, accompanied by a familiar scent that made Marcus's wolf bristle with alarm. Vincent Steele, his business partner and beta, was supposed to be in Boston for another 2 days. Marcus? Vincent's voice carried down the hall. I saw your car. We need to talk, there's been a development with the council. Elena went pale, her arms tightening protectively around Sophie. The Pack Council, the governing body of Werewolf Society, was not something to be taken lightly. If they were investigating anything related to bloodlines or succession. Stay here, Marcus ordered, his voice carrying alpha command. Don't make a sound. But it was too late. Vincent's footsteps had stopped outside the study door, and Marcus could sense his beta's attention focusing on the room with predatory intensity. Interesting, Vincent said, his voice carrying a note of cold satisfaction. It seems the rumors were true after all. The door opened, and Vincent stepped inside, his calculating gaze taking in the scene, Elena clutching Sophie protectively, Marcus standing between them and the door like a guard dog. Vincent's nostrils flared slightly as he scented the air, and a slow smile spread across his face. Well, he said softly. The great Marcus Blackwood, caught harboring secrets. The council is going to find this very interesting indeed. Marcus felt his world tilt again, but this time it wasn't from discovery, it was from the cold realization that Vincent's arrival wasn't a coincidence. His beta had known. Had been watching, waiting for the right moment to strike. Vincent, Marcus said carefully, his voice deadly calm. What exactly are you doing here? Cleaning up loose ends, Vincent replied, his smile never wavering. The council will be here tomorrow, Marcus. They've been asking questions about irregularities in the bloodline, about children that don't appear on any official records. I wonder what they'll make of this touching family reunion. Sophie whimpered, sensing the tension in the room, and Elena gathered her closer. Shoo, sweetheart, she whispered. Everything's going to be all right. But Marcus knew with cold certainty that nothing was going to be all right ever again. The careful balance he'd maintained for 5 years was crumbling, and the woman and child he'd just discovered were his responsibility, his family, were now in more danger than they knew. The storm outside seemed to echo his thoughts, thunder rolling across the sky like a warning of the tempest to come. Chapter 3. The black SUVs arrived at dawn like harbingers of doom, their tinted windows reflecting the pale morning light as they wound up the circular drive to Blackwood Manor. Marcus watched from his study window, his hands gripping the windowsill hard enough to leave marks in the wood. The Pack Council had come. Behind him, Elena sat in the leather chair where he'd found her the night before, Sophie curled in her lap like a sleeping kitten. Neither had left the study after Vincent's ominous departure, both understanding without words that safety lay in staying together. Marcus had spent the sleepless hours pacing the room like a caged wolf, his mind racing through options that all led to the same impossible choice. Acknowledge Sophie and claim her as his heir, exposing both her and Elena to the brutal politics of pack hierarchy. Or deny her, keeping them safe but losing the daughter he'd only just discovered, and condemning her to a life of questions without answers. "They're here," he said quietly, his voice hoarse from the long night. Elena's arms tightened around Sophie, who was just beginning to stir. "What happens now?" "Now we face the music." Marcus turned from the window, his amber eyes meeting hers across the room. In the pale morning light, he could see the exhaustion etched in her delicate features, the fear she was trying so hard to hide. "Whatever happens, Elena, I want you to know." The massive front door chimed, its deep tones echoing through the manor like a funeral bell. Marcus's jaw clenched. "They're here." Heavy footsteps echoed on the marble stairs, accompanied by voices that carried the weight of absolute authority. Marcus straightened his shoulders, calling on every ounce of alpha dominance he possessed. He would need it all to survive what was coming. The study door opened without ceremony, and Elder Thorne stepped inside. At 70, Thorne was still an imposing figure, tall and lean with silver hair and ice-blue eyes that missed nothing. His presence filled the room like winter itself, cold and inexorable. Behind him came 3 other council members, Elder Morrison, a heavy-set man with calculating eyes, Elder Chong, whose delicate appearance hid a mind like a steel trap, and Elder Santos, the youngest at 50, whose loyalty to traditional pack law was absolute. "Marcus." Thorne's voice carried no warmth, no acknowledgement of their past relationship. This was not the man who had helped raise Marcus after his parents' death, but the supreme authority of werewolf law. "We meet under unfortunate circumstances." "Elder Thorne." Marcus inclined his head slightly, a gesture of respect, but not submission. "I wasn't expecting the council so early." "Were you not?" Thorne's gaze swept the room, taking in Elena and Sophie with clinical assessment. "Perhaps your beta failed to inform you properly of our urgency." Vincent slipped into the room behind the council members, his expression carefully neutral. "I delivered your message exactly as instructed, Elder." Something cold slithered down Marcus's spine. There was something in Vincent's tone, a subtle smugness that set his wolf on edge. But before he could analyze it further, Thorne's attention focused on Elena with laser intensity. "You are Elena Rosewood," he said, not a question but a statement. "Daughter of Margaret Rosewood, former head housekeeper of this estate." "Yes, Elder." Elena's voice was barely above a whisper, her omega instincts making her want to submit completely to the overwhelming alpha presence in the room. But she kept her chin raised, her arms protective around Sophie. "And this child?" Thorne stepped closer, his nostrils flaring slightly as he scented the air. Marcus saw the moment recognition hit, the slight widening of his eyes, the sharp intake of breath. "This child carries Blackwood blood." It wasn't a question, and Marcus felt the trap closing around them like iron jaws. "Elder." Silence. The word cracked through the air with alpha command so powerful that even Marcus felt compelled to obey. "We are not here for your explanations, Marcus. We are here for truth." Sophie had awakened fully now, her amber eyes, so achingly familiar, fixed on the intimidating strangers with a child's fearless curiosity. "Mama," she whispered, "who are the scary men?" Elder Chong leaned forward, her dark eyes sharp with interest. "The child speaks." "How old is she?" "4," Elena answered reluctantly. "4 years old, with Blackwood coloring and Blackwood eyes." Elder Morrison's voice carried a note of satisfaction, as if a puzzle piece had just clicked into place. "Born approximately 9 months after Isabella Blackwood's funeral, I would estimate." The words hung in the air like an accusation. Marcus felt his wolf rise, protective instinct screaming at him to get between his family and the threat. But he forced himself to remain still, knowing that any aggressive move would only make things worse. "The question," Thorne said slowly, his gaze moving between Marcus and Elena, "is whether this child is legitimate issue of the Blackwood line, or merely the product of an alpha's moment of weakness with his staff. Elena flinched as if she'd been slapped, and something dangerous flickered in Marcus's chest. "Careful, Elder," he said quietly, his voice carrying a warning that made the other council members shift uneasily. "Are you claiming her?" Thorn asked bluntly. "This child, are you willing to acknowledge her as your daughter and heir?" The moment stretched between them, heavy with consequence. Marcus looked at Sophie, at her perfect little face and intelligent amber eyes, and felt something settle into place in his chest. This was his daughter. His blood, his legacy, his responsibility. But acknowledging her meant exposing her to everything: the politics, the danger, the burden of being heir to one of the most powerful packs in North America. It meant Elena would become a target for anyone who wanted to hurt him. It meant their simple, hidden life would be destroyed forever. He began, but Elena's voice cut through his words. "I can answer for myself," she said, her voice stronger than it had been all morning. She rose from the chair, settling Sophie on her hip with practiced ease, and faced the council with a courage that made Marcus's chest tighten with pride and fear. "You want to know if Sophie is legitimate?" Elena continued, her dark eyes blazing with maternal fire. "She's legitimate in every way that matters. She's loved, she's protected, and she's exactly where she belongs." Elder Chung raised an eyebrow. "That is not what we mean by legitimate, and you know it." "Then perhaps the council needs to reconsider what legitimacy means," Elena shot back, and Marcus felt his wolf sit up and take notice. This was not the quiet, submissive Omega who had served his household for 5 years. This was a mother protecting her cub, and she was magnificent. Elder Santos leaned forward, his weathered face creased with disapproval. "You dare lecture the council on pack law?" "I dare protect my daughter from people who would judge a child based on the circumstances of her birth rather than who she is." Elena's voice carried a strength that resonated through the room, touching something primal in every wolf present. Thorn's eyes narrowed with what might have been respect. "You have spirit, Omega. But spirit alone does not determine legitimacy." He turned back to Marcus. "We require an answer. Do you claim this child as your heir?" Marcus looked at Elena, brave, fierce Elena who had sacrificed everything to protect their daughter, and knew he could do no less. "Yes," he said clearly, his voice carrying throughout the room. "I claim Sophie Rosewood as my daughter and heir to the Blackwood pack." The words seemed to echo in the sudden silence. Elder Morrison made a note on the tablet he carried, while Elder Chung watched Marcus with calculating eyes. Only Thorn seemed unsurprised by the admission. "Then we have a problem," the elder said quietly. "Because claiming her opens questions that have been buried for 5 years." "What questions?" Marcus demanded. Thorn was quiet for a long moment, his ice-blue gaze moving between Marcus and Sophie with an expression Marcus couldn't read. When he finally spoke, his words changed everything. "Your wife Isabella was infertile, Marcus. She had been since a childhood illness when she was 12. The marriage was arranged not just for political alliance, but because the council knew she could never produce an heir that would complicate future plans." The study fell into stunned silence. Marcus felt the floor shift beneath his feet, his carefully ordered understanding of his marriage crumbling. "That's impossible." "She never said. She never knew," Thorn continued relentlessly. "The decision was made to protect her dignity and your marriage. But it means, Marcus, that this child," he gestured towards Sophie, "is not just your daughter. She's your only possible heir. The only continuation of the Blackwood bloodline." Elena had gone pale, her arms tightening protectively around Sophie. "What does that mean?" "It means," Elder Chung said with cold precision, "that this child is far more important than we initially realized. Important enough to change the entire structure of pack politics on the eastern seaboard. Important enough," added Elder Morrison, "that some might kill to prevent her from claiming her birthright." Marcus felt ice form in his veins. "Are you threatening?" "We are stating facts," Thorn cut him off. "This child's existence changes everything. There will be those who see her as an opportunity, and others who see her as a threat to be eliminated. Sophie had been listening with the solemn attention that children sometimes showed, understanding more than the adults realized. Now she looked up at Elena with worried amber eyes. "Mama, are we in trouble?" "No, sweetheart," Elena whispered, pressing a kiss to her daughter's silver hair. "Everything's going to be all right." But Marcus could scent the lie in her words, could see the fear she was trying to hide. Nothing was going to be all right. Not anymore. "The council demands a formal trial," Thorne announced, his voice carrying the weight of absolute law. "Sophie Rosewood's legitimacy must be established beyond question, and the implications of her birthright must be examined. We will convene tomorrow at sunset." "A public trial?" Marcus asked, though he already knew the answer. "Public and binding." Thorne's expression was granite. "The entire Eastern Pack Alliance will attend. Your daughter's fate, and yours, will be decided before all." The elder turned to go, the other council members falling into step behind him. But as he reached the doorway, he suddenly stumbled, one hand going to his throat. "Thorne?" Elder Chung caught his arm, her face creased with concern. The elder's ice-blue eyes were wide with shock and something else, fear. His mouth opened as if to speak, but instead of words, blood trickled from the corner of his lips. "Poison," he gasped, his voice barely audible. His gaze found Marcus across the room, and in his eyes was a desperate urgency. "Traitor, in the pack, wants the Blackwood line eliminated." Elder Thorne collapsed to his knees, his body convulsing as whatever poison coursed through his system claimed him. The other council members rushed to his aid, but Marcus could see it was too late. As chaos erupted around them, Marcus met Vincent's eyes across the room and saw something there that chilled him to the bone. His beta was smiling. The game had begun, and the stakes were now life and death. Chapter 4. The chaos following Elder Thorne's collapse lasted exactly 97 seconds. Marcus knew because he counted every one, his mind cataloging escape routes while his body remained frozen in apparent shock. Around him, the remaining council members worked frantically over Thorne's convulsing form, their voices sharp with medical commands that would do no good. The elder was already dead. Marcus could scent it, the metallic tang of blood mixed with something bitter and foreign. Wolfsbane, most likely, refined and concentrated to act quickly even on an alpha as powerful as Thorne. What chilled Marcus's blood wasn't the poison itself, but the timing. Whoever had done this had known exactly when Thorne would be vulnerable, exactly where he would be standing. Someone with intimate knowledge of council protocols and access to the manor. Someone he trusted. Vincent stood near the doorway, his face a mask of concern as he spoke in urgent whispers to Elder Santos. To anyone watching, he appeared properly horrified by the elder's sudden death. But Marcus caught the micro-expression that flitted across his beta's features when he thought no one was looking, satisfaction mixed with cold calculation. The pieces clicked together with sickening clarity. Vincent's unexpected return from Boston. His knowledge of council investigations. The way he'd positioned himself to witness Sophie's revelation. And now Thorne's death, conveniently removing the one elder who might have protected Marcus during the coming trial. Vincent wasn't just complicit in this conspiracy, he was orchestrating it. "Elena," Marcus said quietly, not looking at her but knowing she would hear the urgency in his voice. "Take Sophie to your quarters. Now." "But. Now." The alpha command in his voice was subtle but irresistible. Elena rose immediately, Sophie still clutched in her arms, the little girl's amber eyes wide with confusion at the chaos surrounding them. Elder Chung looked up from Thorne's still form, her face grim. "He's gone." The poison was too fast, too concentrated. Her dark eyes found Marcus. "This was planned." "Yes," Marcus agreed, his gaze never leaving Vincent. "The question is by whom?" Vincent stepped forward, his expression appropriately grave. "We need to secure the manor immediately. If someone was able to poison an elder within these walls, no one is safe." He pulled out his phone with practiced efficiency. "I'll call an additional security from the Boston territory." "No." The single word cut through Vincent's smooth suggestions like a blade. The beta's hand stilled on his phone, his eyes flicking to Marcus with the first hint of wariness. No additional security, Marcus continued, his voice deadly calm. In fact, I think we have quite enough wolves in the house already. Elder Santos frowned, his weathered face creased with confusion. Marcus, surely you understand the gravity of the situation. With Thorn dead and threats against your daughter. Oh, I understand perfectly. Marcus moved with predatory grace to his desk, his fingers trailing over the surface as if seeking something. The threats against my daughter are very real. They're also coming from much closer than anyone realizes. Vincent's mask slipped for just a moment, a flash of something cold and calculating before his expression returned to one of concerned confusion. Marcus, what are you suggesting? Instead of answering, Marcus opened the desk drawer and withdrew a small digital recorder, its LED light blinking red. He'd activated it the moment he'd heard the council's vehicles in the driveway, a precaution born from 5 years of navigating pack politics. I'm suggesting, Marcus said quietly, that we listen to what Elder Thorn was trying to tell us before he died. He pressed play, and Thorn's dying words filled the room. Traitor, in the pack, once the Blackwood line, eliminated. The silence that followed was deafening. Elder Chang's eyes sharpened with understanding, while Elder Santos took an unconscious step back from Vincent. Morrison, ever the politician, simply watched with calculating interest. Vincent, to his credit, maintained his facade. A dying man's ravings. Thorn could have been referring to anyone. Could he? Marcus moved closer, his wolf rising to the surface as predatory instincts took hold. Tell me, Vincent, how did you know the council was coming? I never received official notification. I heard rumors in Boston. Pack politics, you know how it is. And yet you left a crucial deal negotiation to rush back here based on rumors? Marcus circled closer, and he could see sweat beginning to bead on his beta's forehead. How convenient that you arrived just in time to witness Sophie's discovery. Marcus, you're being paranoid. Am I? Marcus's voice dropped to a growl. Then you won't mind explaining why I can scent wolfsbane on your clothes. Vincent's facade cracked completely. His eyes went cold, his posture shifting from concerned ally to predatory threat. You always were too clever for your own good, Marcus. The admission hung in the air like a death sentence. Elder Chung hissed in shock while Santos reached for his phone, but Vincent was already moving. A silver blade appeared in his hand, not standard issue, but something designed specifically for killing werewolves. The Morganti pack sends their regards, Vincent snarled, lunging forward with inhuman speed. Marcus was faster. 5 years of leading one of the most dangerous packs on the continent hadn't dulled his reflexes. He caught Vincent's wrist, twisting until bones cracked and the blade clattered to the floor. But Vincent wasn't alone. The study windows exploded inward as 3 wolves in human form crashed through the glass, their movements coordinated and deadly. Morganti assassins, Marcus realized, the rival pack from the Midwest that had been challenging Blackwood territory for decades. Elena. Marcus roared, even as he threw Vincent across the room into the far wall. Run. He could hear her feet on the stairs, Sophie's frightened cries echoing through the house. Good. If they could reach the escape routes he'd established years ago. One of the assassins broke away from the fight, heading for the doorway. Marcus intercepted him with a snarl, his claws extending as his wolf fought for dominance. Blood sprayed across expensive wallpaper as they crashed through furniture, the civilized veneer of his study dissolving into primal violence. Go. Elder Chung shouted at Santos and Morrison. Alert the other territories. Tell them the Blackwood line is under attack. But Marcus knew it was too late for official help. Vincent had planned this too carefully, timed it too perfectly. The council was scattered, Thorn was dead, and the Morganti wolves were already in the house. He fought his way through the assassins, driven by desperation and the primal need to protect his family. Behind him, he could hear Vincent's laughter, cold and triumphant. You can't protect them forever, Marcus, his former beta called out. The little girl is too valuable to let live, and the Omega, well, she's just collateral damage. Marcus broke the neck of the wolf he was fighting and sprinted for the stairs, his heart hammering against his ribs. He could scent Elena and Sophie's fear trail leading toward the servants' quarters, but there were other scents too, more Morganti wolves, closing in from multiple directions. He found them in Elena's small room, Sophie pressed against her mother's chest while Elena stood frozen by the window. Outside, Marcus could see moving shadows, at least 6 more wolves surrounding the manor. "There's too many," Elena whispered, her face pale but determined. "They've cut off all the exits." "No," Marcus said firmly, moving to the old wardrobe that dominated one wall. "Not all of them." He pulled the heavy furniture aside, revealing a narrow passage his grandfather had built during Prohibition. It led to the wine cellar and from there to the old smuggling tunnels that connected to the forest. "Marcus," Elena breathed, understanding immediately. "The tunnels haven't been used in decades. They could have collapsed. They're our only chance." He could hear footsteps on the stairs now, Vincent's voice directing the search. "We have to go. Now." Elena didn't hesitate. She clutched Sophie tighter and stepped into the narrow passage, Marcus close behind. The darkness swallowed them, thick and oppressive, but he could navigate by scent and sound alone. They moved in tense silence through the tunnels, Sophie's frightened whimpers muffled against Elena's shoulder. Behind them, Marcus could hear the distant sounds of pursuit, voices calling out coordinates, the crash of doors being broken down. The tunnels seemed endless, but finally they emerged into the wine cellar, moonlight filtering through high windows. Marcus led them to another hidden panel, this one opening onto a natural cave system that honeycombed the mountain behind the manor. "Where are we going?" Elena asked as they climbed through rocky passages that grew steadily steeper. "There's an old hunting cabin about 5 miles north," Marcus replied, helping her navigate a particularly treacherous section of loose stone. "It's isolated, defensible. We can regroup there." But even as he said it, Marcus knew it was probably futile. Vincent had planned this too carefully, had too many resources. They were buying time, nothing more. They emerged from the caves into dense forest, the canopy so thick it blocked most of the moonlight. Marcus set a punishing pace, his enhanced senses alert for any sign of pursuit. Beside him, Elena matched his speed without complaint, her arms never loosening their protective hold on Sophie. "Marcus," she said quietly as they paused beside a small stream to rest. "There's something I need to tell you." Something in her tone made him look at her more carefully. In the filtered moonlight, her face was pale but determined, and there was something in her dark eyes he'd never seen before. "My mother didn't just work for your family," Elena continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "She was hiding here. Running from something she never wanted me to know about." "Elena, whatever it is can wait." "No, it can't." She shifted Sophie to one arm, reaching into her pocket with the other. She pulled out an old leather journal, its pages yellowed with age. "I found this after she died, hidden in her room. I never understood what it meant until tonight." Marcus took the journal, opening it to pages filled with careful handwriting in a language that looked like Latin but felt older, more primal. Interspersed with the text were drawings, symbols and genealogical charts that made his wolf stir with recognition. "Guardian Omegas," Elena whispered, and Marcus felt the world tilt again. "We're not just normal Omegas, Marcus. We're bred to protect alpha bloodlines. My bloodline has been bound to yours for over 300 years. The implications hit him like a physical blow. Guardian Omegas were legends, myths told around pack fires. They were said to be Omega werewolves with abilities far beyond the normal, enhanced intuition, protective magic, the power to strengthen their bonded alpha beyond normal limits. "That's impossible," he breathed, but even as he said it, he remembered the way Elena had defied the council, the strength she'd shown when protecting Sophie. The way his wolf had always responded to her presence with something deeper than mere attraction. "My mother fled her pack when she was pregnant with me," Elena continued. "She said they wanted to use me, to force a bond with an alpha who would have controlled me completely. She chose freedom instead." Sophie stirred in her arms, her amber eyes opening to focus on Marcus with startling intensity. "Papa," she whispered, the word carrying weight beyond her years. They're coming. Marcus's enhanced hearing picked up the sound a second later, voices in the distance, getting closer. Vincent had found their trail. They ran again, deeper into the forest, but Marcus could sense the net closing around them. Too many wolves, too coordinated. Vincent had planned for every contingency. The old hunting cabin appeared through the trees like salvation, its weathered logs dark against the night sky. But as they approached, Marcus caught a scent that made his heart sink. They were already here. Back away slowly, Marcus whispered, but it was too late. Rifle scopes glinted from the surrounding trees, and Vincent's voice echoed through the forest with cold satisfaction. End of the line, Marcus. Time to face the music. They were surrounded, at least a dozen Morganti wolves with modern weapons and coordinated positions. Marcus put himself between Elena and the threat, his wolf snarling for release. Let them go, Vincent, Marcus called out. This is between you and me. Oh, but it's not. Vincent stepped into view, his clothes torn from their earlier fight but his smile intact. The little girl is the key to everything. With her dead, the Blackwood line ends. The territory defaults to the strongest challenger, and the Morganti pack has been preparing for this day for years. She's just a child. She's a weapon, Vincent replied coldly. One we can't allow to reach maturity. The first shot came from Marcus's left, aimed directly at Sophie's small form. Time slowed to a crawl as Marcus realized he was too far away, too slow to intercept it. But Elena wasn't. She threw herself between the bullet and her daughter, her body taking the impact with a sound that would haunt Marcus's nightmares forever. Blood bloomed across her chest as she collapsed, Sophie tumbling from her arms onto the forest floor. Mama! Sophie's scream tore through the night, raw with grief and terror. Marcus caught Elena as she fell, his hands coming away slick with blood. Too much blood. The bullet had found something vital, and her breathing was already growing shallow. Elena, stay with me, he whispered desperately, pressing his hands against the wound. Don't you dare leave me now. Her dark eyes found his, filled with pain but also with fierce determination. Protect her, she gasped. She's more than either of us realized. Sophie was beside them now, her small hands reaching for her mother with desperate need. Mama, don't go. Please don't go. And that's when it happened. Sophie's amber eyes began to glow, not the normal reflection of werewolf night vision, but something far more powerful. Light seemed to emanate from within, growing brighter with each passing second. The very air around her shimmered with energy that made Marcus's wolf whimper with recognition. The gunfire stopped. Even Vincent's confident voice faltered as an otherworldly presence settled over the forest clearing like a mantle of power. Sophie Blackwood was awakening to her true heritage, Guardian Omega and Alpha bloodlines combined into something the werewolf world had never seen. And she was very, very angry. Chapter 5. The light emanating from Sophie's small form was unlike anything Marcus had ever seen. It pulsed with each of her rapid heartbeats, growing brighter and more intense as her grief and rage fed the power awakening within her. The air itself seemed to thicken, charged with an energy that made every werewolf in the clearing take an involuntary step back. What the hell? Vincent's confident voice cracked, uncertainty creeping in for the first time since his betrayal had been revealed. Sophie's glowing eyes fixed on her mother's pale face, and when she spoke, her voice carried harmonics that seemed to resonate in Marcus's very bones. You hurt my mama. It wasn't the petulant cry of a wounded child. It was a statement of fact, delivered with the cold finality of divine judgment. The forest around them began to respond. Ancient oaks creaked and swayed without wind, their branches reaching towards Sophie as if drawn by her power. Night-blooming flowers opened out of season, their petals glowing with the same ethereal light that surrounded the little girl. Even the earth beneath their feet hummed with energy. Marcus felt his wolf prostrate itself in his mind, recognizing something far older and more powerful than any alpha dominance. This was primal magic, the kind that existed before packs, before civilization, before werewolves had learned to hide their true nature from the world. Sophie, Marcus whispered, his voice rough with awe and fear. "Sweetheart, look at me." Those impossible amber eyes turned to him, and Marcus saw depths of wisdom that had no place in a 4-year-old's gaze. "Papa," she said simply, and the single word carried weight that made his chest ache. "Mama's hurt." "I know, baby. I know." Marcus kept his voice gentle even as Elena's blood continued to seep between his fingers. Her breathing was growing shallower, her heartbeat irregular. They were losing her. Sophie placed one small, glowing hand on Elena's wound. The moment her skin made contact, the light around her intensified to near blinding levels. Marcus felt power flow through the air like electricity, and Elena's body arched beneath his hands as something fundamental shifted. The blood flow stopped. The ragged wound began to close, tissue knitting itself back together with impossible speed. Elena's breathing steadied, her heartbeat growing stronger with each passing second. But the effort was costing Sophie everything. The little girl swayed on her knees, her glowing eyes beginning to flutter closed. "Mama," she whispered, her voice fading. "I love you, Mama." Sophie collapsed beside Elena, her small body going limp as the otherworldly light finally dimmed and died. But the healing was complete. Elena's wound had vanished entirely, leaving only torn fabric and dried blood as evidence of what had occurred. The forest fell into stunned silence. Even Vincent's Morganti wolves seemed frozen by what they'd witnessed, their weapons lowered as they tried to process the impossible. Elena's eyes snapped open with a sharp intake of breath, her body surging upright with inhuman speed. But instead of relief, Marcus felt his wolf stir with new recognition. Something had changed in Elena too. Her scent was different, richer, more complex, layered with power that hadn't been there before. "Sophie." Elena's voice cracked as she reached for her unconscious daughter, gathering the little girl against her chest. "Oh God, what did she do? What did she do?" "She saved you," Marcus said quietly, his hands gentle as he checked Sophie's pulse. Strong and steady, but she was deeply unconscious, her small face peaceful in a way that suggested more than simple sleep. At the cost of herself. Elena's dark eyes blazed with fury as she looked up at Vincent and his wolves. When she spoke, her voice carried an authority that hadn't been there before, the unmistakable resonance of awakened power. "You will leave," she said simply. "Now." Vincent laughed, but there was a nervous edge to the sound. "I don't think you're in any position to make demands, little Omega." The words died in his throat as Elena rose to her feet, Sophie cradled in her arms. The air around her shimmered with barely contained energy, and Marcus could see silver markings beginning to appear on her skin, intricate patterns that seemed to move and shift in the moonlight. "I am Elena Rosewood of the Guardian bloodline," she said, her voice carrying across the clearing with supernatural clarity. "And you have threatened my child." The very trees seemed to lean away from Vincent and his wolves, as if the forest itself was rejecting their presence. Several of the Morganti fighters took nervous steps backward, their earlier confidence cracking under the weight of Elena's transformed presence. But Vincent had committed too much to back down now. He raised his rifle with shaking hands. "Shadow magic or not, you're still flesh and blood. And the Morganti pack doesn't bow to." The gunshot never came. A massive form crashed through the tree line with the force of an avalanche, sending Vincent's wolves scattering like leaves. More figures emerged from the forest, wolves in both human and beast form, moving with the coordinated precision of a true pack. The cavalry had arrived. At their head strode a woman Marcus recognized with a surge of relief. Elder Sage, Thorn's younger sister, moved with the fluid grace of a born leader. Her silver hair was pulled back in a severe bun, her ice-blue eyes, so like her dead brothers, surveying the scene with sharp intelligence. "Vincent Steele," she said, her voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. "By order of the Pack Council, you are under arrest for treason, murder, and conspiracy against an alpha bloodline." Vincent's face twisted with desperate fury. "You're too late, old woman. The girl's power is awakening. The Morganti pack will face judgment for their part in this," Sage interrupted coldly. "As will you. Surrender now, or be taken by force." For a moment, Marcus thought Vincent might actually fight, suicidal though it would be against Elder Sage's reinforcements. But then the former beta's gaze fell on Sophie's unconscious form, and something calculating flickered in his eyes. "This isn't over," he snarled, backing toward the treeline. "The shadow wolves are already moving. You can't protect her from what's coming." He melted into the forest with his remaining wolves, leaving behind only the acrid scent of fear and defeat. Marcus started to follow, but Sage's voice stopped him. "Let him go," she said quietly. "We have more pressing concerns." She approached Elena and Sophie with careful reverence, her expression softening as she took in the little girl's peaceful features. "A true born," she whispered. "I never thought I'd live to see one." "A what?" Marcus demanded, though part of him already understood. The power he'd felt radiating from Sophie, the way the very forest had responded to her presence, this was something beyond normal werewolf abilities. "A true born," Sage repeated, her voice filled with awe. "A werewolf born once in a century with the power to unite fractured packs, to heal the divisions that threaten our species. Your daughter, Marcus, is legend made flesh." Elena held Sophie closer, her guardian markings still faintly visible on her skin. "What does that mean for her? What kind of life will she have?" "That depends," Sage said carefully, "on whether her parents are worthy of guiding such power." Marcus felt ice form in his veins. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that the council requires proof," Sage replied. "Sophie's abilities are beyond anything we've seen in living memory. If she's to be raised as a true born should be, protected, trained, prepared for her destiny, we must know that those guiding her are strong enough, worthy enough, to handle the responsibility." "We're her parents," Elena said fiercely, her power flaring again. "That should be enough." "Should be," Sage agreed. "But the council demands more. Marcus, you must undergo the trial of truth, a test of worthiness that will prove your fitness to father a true born and claim a guardian Omega as your mate." Marcus had heard whispers of the trial of truth in pack legends, an ancient ritual that tested not just an alpha's strength, but the very core of their being. It was said to reveal the truth of a wolf's heart, stripping away all pretense and facade to expose what lay beneath. "And if I refuse?" he asked, though he already knew he wouldn't. "Couldn't." "Then Sophie will be removed from your care and raised by the council," Sage said with brutal honesty. "Elena will be returned to a guardian facility for proper training. And you will be stripped of your alpha status for failing to protect your bloodline." The ultimatum hung in the air like a death sentence. Marcus looked at Elena, at the woman who had risked everything to protect their daughter, who had awakened to powers beyond imagination to keep their family together. He thought of Sophie, unconscious in her mother's arms, bearing the weight of legendary responsibility on her tiny shoulders. "I'll do it," he said quietly. "Whatever the trial requires." Sage nodded with what might have been approval. "The ritual must begin immediately. Sophie's awakening has sent ripples through the supernatural world, others will be drawn to her power like moths to flame. We need to establish your worthiness before they arrive." As if summoned by her words, a chill wind swept through the clearing, carrying scents that made Marcus's wolf cower in recognition. Death, corruption, and something else, a hungry emptiness that seemed to devour light itself. "Shadow wolves," Sage breathed, her face going pale. Vincent wasn't bluffing. "They're already moving." Elena looked up sharply. "What are shadow wolves?" "Corrupted werewolves who feed on pack energy," Sage explained rapidly. "They're drawn to power like Sophie's, they'll want to consume her abilities, to add her strength to their own twisted existence." The wind grew stronger, bringing with it the distant sound of howls that seemed to echo from the depths of hell itself. Marcus felt his protective instincts surge, his wolf snarling with the need to defend his family. "How long do we have?" he asked. "Minutes, maybe less." Sage was already moving, her pack forming a defensive perimeter around them. "The trial of truth normally takes hours, but we'll have to compress it. Are you prepared to face the deepest truths of your heart while shadow wolves circle us like vultures?" Marcus looked at Elena, at the silver markings that still glowed faintly on her skin, at Sophie's peaceful face. Everything he cared about, everything worth fighting for, was right here in this clearing. "I'm ready," he said. The trial began with Sage placing her hands on Marcus's forehead, her power flowing into him like ice water in his veins. The world around him shifted and blurred, reality bending as the ritual took hold. He found himself standing in a vast, empty space that could have been the bottom of the ocean or the surface of an alien moon. Before him stretched 3 paths, each leading toward challenges he couldn't yet see but could feel in his bones. The first path glowed with the warm light of memory, his past, his mistakes, everything that had brought him to this moment. The second pulsed with the harsh glare of truth, his present self, stripped of all pretense and facade. The third stretched into darkness unknown, his future, the choices he would make and the man he would become. He had to walk all 3 paths, face all 3 truths, and emerge worthy of the trust Sophie and Elena had placed in him. Marcus took his first step into memory just as the shadow wolves' howls grew louder, closer, hungrier. Back in the clearing, Elena held Sophie's unconscious form and watched Marcus's body stand motionless in Sage's grip, his eyes rolled back as he faced trials she couldn't imagine. Around them, the pack formed defensive positions while the very air grew thick with approaching malevolence. But it was Sophie who worried her most. The little girl's breathing remained steady, but she showed no signs of waking. The healing had drained her completely, leaving her trapped in a sleep that might last days or weeks or. Elena pushed the thought away. Sophie would wake up. She had to. The shadow wolves burst from the tree line like living nightmares, their forms twisted parodies of true werewolves. Where normal wolves had fur, these creatures showed patches of rotted skin and exposed bone. Where normal wolves had eyes, these things bore pits of absolute darkness that seemed to swallow light. And they were heading straight for Sophie. Elena clutched her daughter closer, her guardian abilities surging to the surface. She could keep Sophie safe or help defend Marcus while he completed his trial. But she couldn't do both. The choice was torn from her hands as Sophie's amber eyes suddenly snapped open, blazing with renewed power. "No more running," the little girl said in a voice far older than her years. "Time to fight." Sophie slipped from Elena's arms and walked toward the advancing shadow wolves, her small form radiating power that made the very air shimmer with potential. The true born had awakened, and she was done hiding. Chapter 6. Sophie walked toward the advancing shadow wolves with the steady gait of a child who had never known fear, her small form blazing with power that turned the night into day. The corrupted creatures recoiled from her light, their twisted forms writhing as if the very essence of her being was painful to them. "Sophie, no." Elena lunged forward, her guardian instinct screaming at her to protect her daughter, but the little girl turned those impossible amber eyes on her and smiled. "It's okay, Mama," Sophie said, her voice carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate in Elena's bones. "They're just sick. Maybe I can help them get better." The innocence in those words, spoken while facing creatures of absolute corruption, nearly broke Elena's heart. But before she could reach her daughter, the shadow wolf struck. They moved like living nightmares, their forms shifting between wolf and something far worse, things that had once been werewolves but had surrendered their souls to hunger and power. Their leader, a massive creature with eyes like black holes, let out a howl that seemed to tear reality itself. Elder Sage's pack met them in a clash of fangs and claws that shook the ancient trees. The sound was deafening, snarls and screams mixing with the crack of breaking bones and the wet tear of flesh. But the shadow wolves were too strong, too numerous, driven by a hunger that made them fearless. Elena watched in horror as one of Sage's wolves was overwhelmed, shadow creatures tearing at him with claws that left wounds too dark to heal naturally. Without thinking, she reached out with her newly awakened abilities, trying to help. Power flowed from her like water breaking through a dam. The wounded wolf suddenly blazed with renewed strength, his injuries healing with impossible speed as Elena's guardian energy poured into him. But it wasn't just healing, she could feel his natural abilities amplifying, his speed and strength increasing beyond normal limits. By the ancient pacts, Sage breathed, pausing in her own battle to stare at Elena in wonder. "You're not just awakening, you're fully realized. A guardian Omega at full power." Elena didn't have time to process what that meant. Around the clearing, the battle was turning against them. The shadow wolves were too strong, too coordinated, and they all seemed focused on one target, Sophie, who stood in the center of the chaos like a beacon of pure light. "I can help," Elena called to Sage, extending her consciousness toward the embattled pack members. "Let me help them." She reached out with her power, touching each of the loyal wolves in turn. Immediately, their abilities surged. Wounds healed, strength doubled, speed increased beyond anything they'd ever experienced. The tide of battle began to shift as Sage's pack fought with superhuman fury. But the shadow wolves weren't alone. Vincent emerged from the tree-line with his remaining Morganti fighters, but these weren't the same wolves who had fled earlier. Something had changed them. Their eyes held the same hungry darkness as the shadow wolves, and their scents carried the acrid taint of corruption. "Vincent," Elena gasped, recognizing the horrible truth. "You didn't just ally with them. You became one of them." Vincent's laugh was like breaking glass. "I became something better," he snarled, his form beginning to shift into something that was neither fully human nor fully wolf. "The shadow wolves showed me true power, not the weakness of pack bonds, but the strength that comes from consuming others." He gestured to his corrupted fighters. "These were some of your most loyal, Marcus. Young wolves who believed in honor and duty and all the other lies you fed them. Now they feed on the power they once served." The revelation hit Marcus like a physical blow. Even trapped in his trial, some part of him must have sensed the betrayal. Several of the corrupted wolves bore faces he recognized, pack members who had disappeared over the past year, wolves he'd assumed had been killed in territorial disputes. Vincent had been feeding his own pack to the shadow wolves, turning them into weapons against everything they'd once protected. "You monster," Elena whispered, her guardian markings blazing silver with fury. "They were children. They were weakness," Vincent replied coldly. "But don't worry, your daughter will make a much more satisfying meal." The corrupted Morganti wolves charged, but they were met by Sophie's blazing power. Light erupted from the little girl with such intensity that several shadow wolves simply disintegrated, their corrupted forms unable to withstand her purifying radiance. But the effort was costing her. Elena could see Sophie swaying on her feet, her small face pale with exhaustion. The true-born might have legendary power, but she was still only 4 years old. "She can't sustain this," Sage shouted over the din of battle. "The child will burn herself out." Elena pushed her abilities harder, trying to channel her strength to Sophie while continuing to amplify the pack's fighting capabilities. But she was reaching her limits too, her newly awakened powers demanding more energy than her body could provide. That's when she felt it, another presence entering the battle, cold and familiar and impossible. The temperature in the clearing dropped 20 degrees in an instant. Frost began forming on the trees despite the warm spring night, and every wolf, shadow, loyal, and corrupted alike, suddenly froze as a scent filled the air that made Elena's blood turn to ice. Isabella Blackwood stepped into the clearing like a queen surveying her domain. She looked exactly as she had 5 years ago, elegant, beautiful, with the kind of refined features that belonged on magazine covers. But her eyes held depths of darkness that rivaled the shadow wolves, and power radiated from her in waves that made the very ground beneath their feet crack and split. "Hello, darling," she said to Marcus's motionless form, her voice carrying clearly across the sudden silence. "Miss me?" Elena felt the world tilt on its axis. Isabella was supposed to be dead, she'd attended the funeral, had watched them lower the casket into the ground. But here she stood, very much alive and radiating a power that felt older and darker than anything Elena had ever encountered. "Impossible," Sage breathed, her ice-blue eyes wide with shock. "I sensed her death myself." "We all did." Isabella's laugh was like winter wind through dead leaves. "Oh, I did die," she said conversationally, moving closer to Sophie with predatory grace. "For about 30 seconds. Long enough to convince everyone I was gone, short enough to avoid any permanent inconvenience." Sophie, despite her exhaustion, turned to face the newcomer with those 2 old amber eyes. "You're the sad lady," she said simply. "You've been sad for so long." Something flickered in Isabella's dark gaze, surprise, perhaps, or recognition. Perceptive child. Yes, I suppose I have been sad. Sad that my husband never loved me. Sad that I could never give him the air he needed. Sad that I was always second best to everyone and everything in his life. Elena felt pieces clicking together with horrible clarity. The infertility wasn't natural, she whispered. You did something. Made some kind of deal. Very good, Isabella purred. I traded my ability to bear children for power beyond imagining. The shadow wolves have existed far longer than any pack knows. They offered me strength, immortality, the ability to reshape the werewolf world according to my vision. And in return? Sage demanded, though Elena suspected she already knew the answer. In return, I feed them power. Pack energy, life force, the bonds that hold werewolf society together. Isabella's smile was sharp as broken glass. I've been systematically corrupting young wolves for years, turning them into shadow creatures that can infiltrate and destroy packs from within. Vincent's corruption suddenly made perfect sense. He hadn't allied with the shadow wolves, he'd been Isabella's puppet from the beginning, following orders he probably didn't even realize weren't his own thoughts. But why come back now? Elena asked, though she feared she already knew. Isabella's gaze fixed on Sophie with naked hunger. Because now there's finally a prize worth the risk. A true-born child, blazing with power that could sustain my kind for centuries. Your daughter, dear Elena, is the key to everything. Sophie took a step backward, her light flickering as exhaustion threatened to overwhelm her. I don't want to go with you, she said quietly. You smell like the dark place. What you want is irrelevant, child. Isabella raised her hand, and shadows began gathering around her fingers like living things. You're coming with me whether you... Marcus's roar of fury shattered the night air. His trial might not be complete, but somehow he was fighting his way back to consciousness, driven by the need to protect his daughter. Elena could see his body beginning to stir in Sage's grip, his alpha power battling against the ritual that held him. But Isabella was faster. Shadow tendrils shot out like whips, wrapping around Sophie before anyone could react. The little girl's scream of terror cut through Elena's heart like a blade. No. Elena lunged forward, but more shadows rose to block her path, forming a barrier she couldn't penetrate despite her guardian abilities. Isabella lifted Sophie effortlessly, the child's struggles futile against her supernatural strength. There we are, she cooed, as if Sophie were a doll rather than a terrified little girl. Much better. Marcus's eyes finally snapped open, blazing with fury that made the air itself tremble. He broke free of Sage's grip with a surge of alpha power that sent ripples through the pack bond, every loyal wolf feeling his rage like a physical force. Let her go, he growled, his voice carrying harmonics that made the trees sway. Now. Isabella smiled with cold satisfaction. I don't think so. But I am willing to make a trade. She held Sophie higher, shadow tendrils wrapping more tightly around the struggling child. Your life for hers, Marcus. One alpha's power to feed my children, and I'll let the little true-born go free. Don't listen to her. Elena shouted, finally understanding Isabella's true plan. She needs Sophie alive, but she doesn't need any of the rest of us. The moment you surrender, she'll kill us all and take Sophie anyway. But Marcus was already stepping forward, his face set with grim determination. Name your terms. Marcus, no. Elena felt her newly awakened abilities surge with desperate fury. There was a way to stop this, she could feel it in her guardian bloodline, a power so ancient and pure that it could cleanse even shadow corruption. But using it would require everything she had. Everything, and possibly more than she could survive. Isabella's eyes gleamed with triumph as Marcus moved closer. Submit your alpha power to me willingly, and I'll release the child unharmed. You have my word. Elena closed her eyes, feeling the weight of choice settle on her shoulders. She could let Marcus sacrifice himself in the probably futile hope that Isabella would honor her bargain. Or she could unleash the full power of her guardian heritage, power that might save them all, but would almost certainly kill her in the process. She looked at Sophie, trapped in Isabella's shadow grip, her amber eyes wide with terror but still blazing with trust that her parents would find a way to save her. The choice wasn't really a choice at all. Elena began to glow. Chapter 7. Elena's body became incandescent, light pouring from her skin like liquid starfire. The silver markings that had appeared during her awakening now blazed across her entire form, ancient guardian symbols that told the story of her bloodline's sacred purpose. The air around her shimmered with power so pure it made the shadow wolves shriek and retreat. "Elena, don't." Marcus's voice carried desperate love and terror in equal measure. He could feel what she was doing through their half-formed mate bond, could sense the life force she was pouring into her abilities. "You'll kill yourself." "Better than losing our daughter," Elena replied, her voice echoing with harmonics that seemed to come from the earth itself. The light around her intensified, and she lifted her hands toward Isabella and the struggling Sophie. What happened next was beyond anything the werewolf world had seen in centuries. A barrier of pure golden light erupted around Sophie, encasing the little girl in a cocoon of protective energy so bright that Isabella's shadow tendrils simply evaporated on contact. The corrupted woman snarled in fury, her beautiful face twisting into something monstrous as her carefully maintained human facade cracked. But Elena wasn't finished. She spread her arms wide, and waves of purifying energy rolled out from her position like ripples in a pond. Where the light touched the corrupted Morganti wolves, they screamed, not in pain, but in something that sounded almost like relief as the shadow corruption was burned away, leaving confused and frightened young wolves who had no memory of what they'd become. "Impossible," Isabella hissed, her form beginning to shift and waver as the purifying light washed over her. "You're just an Omega. You can't have this much power." "I'm not just an Omega," Elena gasped, blood beginning to trickle from her nose as the effort took its toll. "I'm a guardian. And you threatened my child." The barrier around Sophie pulsed brighter, and Isabella was forced to release her grip, the shadow tendrils holding the little girl dissolving like smoke. Sophie tumbled to the ground but was caught by Elena's protective light, gently lowered to safety within the golden cocoon. Marcus felt Elena's pain through their bond, felt the way the power was consuming her from within, burning through her life force like wildfire. She was dying, and there was nothing he could do to stop it while she held the barrier. But he could remove the threat that had made her sacrifice necessary. With a roar of fury that shook the ancient trees, Marcus launched himself at Isabella. His alpha power blazed to life, enhanced by the incomplete trial and his desperate need to protect his family. He struck Isabella with the force of a freight train, sending them both crashing through the tree-line in a tangle of fangs and claws. Isabella met his attack with inhuman strength, her corruption-enhanced abilities making her faster and stronger than any natural werewolf. But Marcus fought with something more powerful than enhanced abilities. He fought with the fury of a mate defending his family, the rage of a father protecting his child. "You should have stayed dead," Marcus snarled, his claws raking across Isabella's perfect face and leaving wounds that oozed black ichor instead of blood. Isabella's laugh was like breaking glass. "Dead? Oh, darling, I was never more alive than I've been these past 5 years." She twisted in his grip with serpentine grace, her own claws finding his ribs. "Do you know how many packs I've fed on? How many young wolves I've corrupted and consumed?" They crashed through trees and boulders, their battle carving a path of destruction through the forest. But with each exchange, Marcus could see the truth of what Isabella had become. This wasn't just corruption, this was consumption. She had been feeding off werewolf life force for years, growing stronger with each pack she destroyed. The Riverside Pack, Marcus realized with horror. The Mountain Creek Wolves. All those territorial disputes, that was you. Finally putting the pieces together? Isabella's form began to shift, growing larger and more monstrous with each passing second. "I've been preparing for this moment for years, darling. Building my strength, corrupting the young and strong, all for this, the chance to claim a true born and rule the werewolf world as it should be ruled." She struck with inhuman speed, her claws finding his throat, but Marcus was ready. He grabbed her wrists, his own alpha power flaring as he fought to keep her talons from his jugular. Back in the clearing, Elena felt her strength failing. The protective barrier around Sophie was holding, but the effort was killing her cell by cell. Her vision blurred, and she could taste copper in her mouth. Through their bond, she felt Marcus's battle with Isabella, felt his desperation and love and the terrible knowledge that she was dying. Not yet, she told herself fiercely. Sophie needs more time to recover. Marcus needs more time to defeat Isabella. I can't let go yet. But her body was betraying her. Her knees buckled, and the golden light surrounding her began to flicker. The barrier around Sophie wavered, and Elena heard the little girl's frightened cry. Mama. Sophie's voice cut through Elena's failing consciousness like a lifeline. Through the golden barrier, she could see her daughter's amber eyes blazing with power and determination. The little girl pressed her small hands against the inside of the protective cocoon. I can help, Sophie said, her voice carrying the wisdom that seemed far too old for her years. Let me help, Mama. Sophie, no, Elena gasped. You're already exhausted. If you use your power again. Together, Sophie interrupted, her eyes meeting Elena's through the barrier. We do it together. Like when I fixed you before, but more. Elena felt Sophie's consciousness touching hers through the guardian bond they shared, felt the pure, untainted power of the true-born offering to merge with her own abilities. But she also felt the cost. This kind of joining would drain both of them beyond recovery. They might save everyone else, but they would fall into a mystical sleep that could last years, decades, or... Sophie, sweetheart, if we do this, we might not wake up for a long time. Sophie's smile was heartbreakingly mature. Papa will wait for us. He loves us that much. Tears streamed down Elena's face as she felt her daughter's absolute faith, her willingness to sacrifice everything to save their family and pack. This was what it meant to be a true-born, not just power, but the wisdom to use it for others, no matter the cost. Together then, Elena whispered, lowering the barrier between them. The moment their powers merged, the entire forest was bathed in light that could be seen for miles. But this wasn't just Elena's golden guardian energy, it was something new, something that had never existed before. The pure power of a true-born combined with the protective might of a fully realized guardian Omega created a force that transcended everything the werewolf world had ever known. The purification wave that erupted from their joining was like a cleansing fire. It swept through the clearing, through the forest, racing outward in an ever-expanding circle of light. Shadow wolves simply dissolved like smoke before it, their corruption unable to exist in the face of such purity. The remaining Morganti fighters collapsed as the darkness was burned from their souls, leaving them gasping and human once more. In the forest, Isabella screamed as the wave reached her. Her stolen power, built from years of consuming other werewolves, began to unravel. The beautiful mask she wore cracked and fell away, revealing something that was no longer entirely human. No, she shrieked, her form beginning to dissolve. I won't go back to being nothing. I won't be weak again. But the purification was inexorable. Isabella's corruption was stripped away layer by layer, revealing the broken woman beneath, someone who had been so afraid of being powerless that she'd traded everything that made her human for the illusion of strength. Marcus watched with grim satisfaction as his former wife was reduced to her true form, not a monster, but a pathetic creature who had sold her soul for power she was never meant to wield. The light consumed her completely, and she was gone, leaving only a whisper of wind through the trees. The purification wave continued outward, reaching pack territories hundreds of miles away. Wherever it touched, corruption was cleansed, shadow wolves were destroyed, and the werewolf world was healed of a cancer it had barely known existed. But at the center of it all, Elena and Sophie were fading. Marcus raced back to the clearing to find them collapsed together, their bodies translucent and growing fainter with each passing second. Sophie was curled against Elena's chest, both of them peaceful in a way that spoke of deep, mystical sleep rather than death. Elena. Marcus dropped to his knees beside them, his hands passing through their fading forms like mist. Elena, don't you dare leave me now. Elena's eyes fluttered open one last time, focusing on his face with visible effort. Marcus, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I love you. I've always loved you. I love you too, Marcus said desperately, tears streaming down his face. Both of you. Please, don't go. Take care of her, Elena continued, her gaze moving to Sophie's peaceful face. When we wake up, she'll need her father. When you wake up? Marcus asked, clinging to the hope in those words. Elena's smile was beatific. True-born sleep isn't death, she whispered. It's healing. Growing. Preparing. Her eyes found his one last time. Wait for us, my love. However long it takes, wait for us. Sophie stirred slightly in Elena's arms, her amber eyes opening just long enough to whisper, "Love you, Papa." And then they were gone, not dead, but transformed into something between dream and reality, their bodies becoming one with the mystical forces they had unleashed. Where they had been lying, two figures of pure light remained, beautiful and ethereal and heartbreakingly untouchable. Elder Sage approached carefully, her face wet with tears. "They're not dead," she said quietly, her voice carrying the authority of ancient knowledge. "This is true-born sleep, a healing trance that allows them to recover from using power beyond mortal limits." "How long?" Marcus asked, his voice broken. "I don't know," Sage admitted. "It could be months, years, possibly decades. True-born sleep follows its own laws." Marcus stared at the figures of light that were all he had left of his maid and daughter. Around him, the forest was already beginning to heal from the night's battles. The corrupted wolves were waking as their true selves, the shadow threat was ended, and the werewolf world had been saved. But Elena and Sophie lay trapped in mystical sleep, beautiful and unreachable, while Marcus faced the most agonizing choice of his life: try to wake them with the risk of killing them permanently, or wait in faith and hope for their return, not knowing if he would live long enough to see them open their eyes again. As dawn broke over Blackwood Manor, Marcus Blackwood sat vigil beside two figures of light, and made his choice. He would wait. However long it took, however much it cost him, he would wait for his family to come home. Chapter 8. 6 months later. The sacred grove behind Blackwood Manor had become the most peaceful place on earth, Marcus thought as he approached the two figures of light that held everything he loved most. Morning mist clung to the ancient oaks, their branches forming a natural cathedral around Elena and Sophie's resting place. Wildflowers bloomed out of season here, drawn by the residual power that still emanated from their sleeping forms. Marcus carried his usual offering, a cup of coffee for Elena, still steaming in the cool morning air, and Sophie's favorite picture book about a little girl who could talk to trees. He settled into the carved stone chair he'd placed between them, close enough to touch if they had been corporeal, far enough away to avoid disrupting whatever mystical forces kept them suspended between worlds. "Good morning, my loves," he said quietly, his voice carrying the easy intimacy of a ritual performed daily for 6 months. "The council meeting went well yesterday. Elder Sage officially approved the new Omega Protection Act. No Omega can be forced into a mating bond without explicit consent, and any Alpha who breaks the law faces immediate expulsion from their pack." He sipped his own coffee, black and bitter the way Elena had never let him drink it when she was awake. She'd always insisted on adding cream, claiming life was too short for unnecessary bitterness. He'd started drinking it her way after the first month, and now the taste of cream reminded him of Sunday mornings in their kitchen, Sophie chattering about her dreams while Elena hummed and made pancakes. "Vincent asked about you both yesterday," Marcus continued, settling back in his chair. "He's different now. Losing his wolf abilities humbled him in ways I never thought possible. He's actually become our best resource for understanding shadow wolf corruption patterns. The rehabilitation program he designed has helped 17 wolves recover their true selves so far." A gentle breeze stirred through the grove, and for a moment Marcus could swear he smelled jasmine, Elena's favorite perfume. He'd given up trying to convince himself these little signs were coincidence. Whether it was wishful thinking or genuine connection, they brought him comfort. "The Riverside pack remnants arrived last week," he said, reaching out to brush an invisible speck of dust from Elena's luminous form. 23 survivors out of nearly 200. Isabella's corruption ran deeper than we ever imagined. But they're healing, slowly. Elder Morrison has been working with their alpha, what's left of him, anyway. The shadow corruption aged him 30 years in the span of months. Marcus paused, his throat tightening with emotion that still caught him off guard after all these months. Sometimes I wonder if you can hear me. Elder Sage says true-born sleep exists partly in the waking world, that your consciousness might be aware even if your bodies are healing. I hope that's true. I hope you know how much the pack has changed, how much good has come from your sacrifice. He'd rebuilt Blackwood territory from the ground up, establishing new laws and customs that would have been unthinkable before Elena and Sophie's awakening. Omegas were no longer second-class citizens but recognized as the emotional and spiritual heart of pack structure. Mixed bloodlines were celebrated rather than hidden. Young wolves were protected and nurtured rather than pushed into adult responsibilities before they were ready. The transformation hadn't been easy. Several old guard alphas had challenged his authority, claiming his progressive policies weakened traditional pack strength. Marcus had dealt with each challenge personally, and after the third challenger ended up in the pack hospital with injuries that took weeks to heal, the complaints had grown notably quieter. Sophie would love the new playground, Marcus said, glancing at his daughter's peaceful form. In the months since the battle, she'd remained exactly as she had been that night, a 4-year-old child wreathed in gentle starlight, her silver hair flowing around her face like moonbeams. We rebuilt it bigger, with equipment designed for all ages. Even Vincent has been spotted pushing some of the younger pups on the swings. I never thought I'd see the day. Marcus reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a letter, the official seal of the North American Pack Alliance gleaming in the morning light. This came yesterday, he said, though he knew Elena and Sophie couldn't respond. An invitation to address the Continental Assembly next month. They want to hear about our revolutionary pack management strategies. He chuckled, a sound that still felt strange after months of grief. If they only knew it all started with a maid hiding her child in an alpha's private study. The memory brought both pain and warmth. Sometimes Marcus wondered what would have happened if he hadn't come home early that night, if he'd never discovered Sophie's existence. Would Elena have continued living in the shadows, raising their daughter alone? Would Vincent's corruption have gone unnoticed until it was too late to stop? Would Isabella have eventually succeeded in destroying everything Marcus had built? The questions were pointless now, but they reminded him that everything, the good and the bad, had stemmed from that one moment of discovery. The Eastern Territories have requested our help with their own corruption investigations, Marcus continued, settling more comfortably in his chair. 3 packs showing signs of shadow wolf influence. Elder Sage thinks there might be other Isabella types out there, wolves who've made similar dark bargains for power. We'll need to. Marcus stopped mid-sentence as something shifted in the grove's atmosphere. The morning mist began to swirl, drawn toward Elena and Sophie's resting place by an invisible force. The wildflowers started glowing softly, their petals opening wider as if turning toward the sun. But it wasn't the sun they were reaching for. Elena's figure of light was growing more solid, more defined, the ethereal glow giving way to flesh and blood and warm brown eyes that fluttered open for the first time in 6 months. Marcus? Her voice was rusty from disuse but unmistakably real, unmistakably her. How long? Marcus was beside her in an instant, his coffee forgotten as he gathered her into his arms. She was solid, warm, alive, but changed. Silver markings traced across her skin in intricate patterns that seemed to shift and flow like living tattoos, beautiful and otherworldly. Her hair was longer, streaked with strands of pure silver, and her eyes held depths that spoke of wisdom gained through mystical experience. 6 months, he whispered against her hair, breathing in her scent, jasmine and something new, like starlight made tangible. 6 months, 13 days, and about 16 hours. Elena's laugh was like music. You counted. Every second, Marcus admitted, pulling back to look at her properly. How do you feel? Before Elena could answer, a soft voice interrupted them. Papa? Mama? They turned to see Sophie sitting up, no longer a 4-year-old child but clearly older, perhaps 7, with the lean grace of a child who'd grown during sleep. Her silver hair fell in waves to her shoulders, and her amber eyes held the same ancient wisdom Elena's did, but tempered with the curiosity natural to childhood. Sophie. Elena reached for her daughter, and Marcus gathered them both into his arms, his family whole for the first time in half a year. I dreamed, Sophie said solemnly, her voice carrying new maturity. I dreamed about the old times, when Guardian Omegas and True-borns worked together to keep the packs safe. I learned so much, Papa. Marcus felt tears streaming down his face as he held them both. Welcome home, he whispered. Both of you. They spent the morning in the grove, Elena and Sophie adjusting to their transformed bodies while Marcus filled them in on everything that had changed. Elena's guardian abilities had evolved beyond anything recorded in pack lore. She could sense corruption across vast distances, cleanse shadow influence with a touch, and strengthen pack bonds in ways that made their territory nearly impregnable to outside threats. Sophie's true-born powers had matured as well. She could communicate with nature itself, command respect from werewolves regardless of their rank, and most importantly, she could heal the kind of spiritual wounds that shadow corruption left behind. The grove, Elena said wonderingly as they prepared to return to the manor. It's changed. I can feel the life flowing through everything here, not just the plants, but the very earth itself. Our sleep did something to this place. It became sacred, Marcus explained. Pack members make pilgrimages here now, seeking healing or guidance. Elder Sage thinks the residual energy from your transformation created a kind of permanent sanctuary. Sophie skipped ahead of them on the path back to the house, her movements a graceful blend of childlike exuberance and supernatural awareness. Papa, she called back, there are people coming. Lots of them. Marcus tensed, his alpha instincts rising, but Elena placed a calming hand on his arm. Not enemies, she said softly, her enhanced senses reading intentions he couldn't detect. They're curious. Hopeful. As they crested the hill overlooking the manor, Marcus saw what Sophie's abilities had detected. The circular drive was filled with vehicles, cars, motorcycles, even a few RVs, all bearing the territorial markings of different packs. Representatives from across North America, drawn by news that the True-born and her guardian mother had awakened. They've come to see if the legends are true, Elena said, her voice thoughtful rather than worried. Some probably hoping to ally with us, others maybe planning to challenge us. But they've come because they need to know what we represent for the future of our people. Marcus felt his protective instincts surge, but Sophie turned back to them with a smile that was pure sunshine. Don't worry, Papa. I know what to do. The next few hours tested every diplomatic skill Marcus had developed over his years as an alpha. Pack representatives filled his great hall, some respectful, others suspicious, a few openly hostile. But it was Elena and Sophie who commanded the room's attention. Elena's silver markings glowed softly whenever she spoke, lending weight to her words that transcended normal pack hierarchy. When the alpha of the Montana territories questioned her authority as just an Omega, the markings flared brighter, and his next words died in his throat as he felt the power that radiated from her transformed presence. Sophie, despite being only 7 in appearance, spoke with the wisdom of centuries. When asked about her intentions for the werewolf world, she answered with a clarity that left the assembled alphas speechless. I'm not here to rule anyone, she said simply, her young voice carrying clearly through the hall. I'm here to help heal the hurts that make packs fight each other instead of working together. The shadow wolves are gone, but the fears that made them possible are still here. We need to fix those fears. By evening, 3 packs had formally requested alliance with Blackwood territory. 5 others had committed to adopting Marcus's progressive policies regarding Omega rights and mixed bloodlines. Even the most skeptical representatives left with expressions of thoughtful consideration rather than outright hostility. You've started something, Elena told Marcus as they stood together on the manor's front steps, watching the last of the visitors depart. A revolution, really. We started something, Marcus corrected, pulling her closer. None of this would have been possible without you and Sophie. As if summoned by the mention of her name, Sophie appeared beside them, slipping her small hand into Marcus's with the ease of a child who had never doubted her place in her father's affections. Papa, she said, her amber eyes serious, will you and Mama do the mating ceremony soon? I've been learning about the traditions while I was asleep, and I think I could help with the ritual parts. Marcus and Elena exchanged glances over Sophie's head. They hadn't discussed the ceremony yet, there had been too much to process, too many changes to navigate. But looking at Elena now, her silver markings glowing softly in the twilight, Marcus knew there was no question about their future. "Would you like that?" he asked Elena quietly. "A formal ceremony?" Elena's smile was radiant. "I'd love that. But I want to combine the traditions, werewolf and guardian both. Let our people see that different bloodlines can create something beautiful together." 3 weeks later, the ceremony took place in the sacred grove where Elena and Sophie had awakened. Representatives from dozens of packs attended, witnessing something unprecedented in werewolf history, the mating of an alpha and a guardian omega, officiated by their true-born daughter. Sophie, wearing a dress of silver silk that seemed to shimmer with its own light, spoke the ancient words with perfect pronunciation, her young voice carrying the authority of destiny itself. When Marcus and Elena exchanged vows, promising to protect not just each other but all those who sought shelter in their combined strength, the very air seemed to bless their union. Elder Sage performed the traditional alpha ceremonies while Sophie guided them through guardian rituals that hadn't been seen in centuries. The combination created something entirely new, a mating bond that transcended normal werewolf limitations, creating a connection that would strengthen their pack for generations to come. As the ceremony concluded and their guests celebrated around them, Marcus felt Elena's hand find his, her fingers intertwining with his own. Sophie stood between them, her amber eyes reflecting the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. "Are you happy?" Elena asked softly, her voice meant for his ears alone. Marcus looked around at their transformed territory, at pack members who had once been enemies now sharing food and laughter, at young wolves playing without fear, at elderly omegas being treated with the respect they deserved. He thought about the letters on his desk from packs requesting guidance, the plans for new schools that would educate werewolf children about both strength and compassion, the future that stretched ahead of them full of possibilities. But mostly he looked at Elena, her silver markings glowing softly in the moonlight, and at Sophie, their miracle daughter who carried the hopes of their entire species. "Happy doesn't begin to cover it," he murmured, kissing Elena's temple. "Complete, maybe. Like everything that came before was just preparation for this moment." 3 months after the ceremony, as autumn painted the mountains in shades of gold and crimson, Marcus found himself in his rebuilt study, the same room where this journey had begun, though it looked nothing like it had that stormy night 6 months ago. The heavy, intimidating furniture had been replaced with comfortable pieces that welcomed visitors rather than intimidating them. Family photos covered the walls where formal pack portraits had once hung. Sophie's artwork was displayed with the same pride Marcus had once reserved for his business achievements. Elena was curled in the window seat, one hand resting on the gentle swell of her belly where their second child grew, the other holding a letter from the European Pack Alliance requesting a cultural exchange program. Sophie sat at a small desk Marcus had built for her, carefully practicing the ancient script that would allow her to read the oldest guardian texts. The scene was so perfectly domestic, so beautifully normal, that Marcus had to stop and marvel at how much their lives had changed. "The Scandinavian packs want to send a delegation next spring," Elena said, looking up from her letter. "They're particularly interested in Sophie's healing techniques for spiritual trauma. And the Australian territories have requested copies of our new pack law codex," Marcus added, settling into his chair with a satisfaction that had nothing to do with business success and everything to do with the knowledge that their work was spreading hope across the world. Sophie looked up from her writing practice, her amber eyes bright with curiosity. "Papa, when the new baby comes, will they have special abilities too?" Marcus and Elena exchanged glances. They'd wondered the same thing, what kind of powers might emerge from the union of an alpha, a guardian omega, and whatever mystical forces had touched their family. "We'll love them no matter what abilities they have," Elena said gently. "Just like we love you." "I hope they're not too powerful at first," Sophie said pragmatically, returning to her writing. "It would be hard to change diapers if the baby could make things explode." Marcus's laughter filled the study, rich and genuine in a way it hadn't been for years before Elena and Sophie had entered his life. Outside, the sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples that seemed to celebrate the peace they'd built together. As if drawn by some invisible signal, all three of them moved to the large window that overlooked their territory. In the distance, Marcus could see the lights beginning to come on in the pack housing they'd built, homes for families rather than just functional shelters. Children played in the communal gardens while their parents worked together on evening chores. The rehabilitation center Vincent ran was hosting a community dinner, former Shadow Wolf victims sharing meals with the wolves who'd helped heal them. It was everything Marcus had never dared to dream of, a pack built on love rather than fear, strength tempered by compassion, tradition balanced with progress. "Look," Sophie whispered, pointing to the horizon. "More visitors." Marcus followed her gaze and saw vehicles approaching in the distance, the advance scouts of another pack delegation, drawn by stories of the True-Born and her family. There would be more meetings, more negotiations, more opportunities to spread the changes they'd begun. But tonight, there was this moment, his mate warm against his side, his daughter's hand in his unborn child growing strong beneath Elena's heart, and the knowledge that they'd built something worth protecting. Elena leaned into him, her silver markings glowing softly in the twilight. "No regrets?" she asked quietly. Marcus thought about the question seriously. His old life had been simpler in some ways, fewer responsibilities, fewer people depending on him, fewer challenges to face each day. But it had also been emptier, colder, built on foundations that crumbled the moment they were tested. This life was harder, more complex, filled with dangers he'd never imagined. But it was also richer, warmer, more meaningful than anything he'd ever experienced. "None," he said firmly, kissing the top of Elena's head and squeezing Sophie's hand. "Not a single one." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Marcus Blackwood stood with his family and looked out over the territory they'd transformed together. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to build the future they envisioned. But tonight, they were simply a family, complete and content and ready for whatever came next. The Alpha had come home early to discover a secret, but in the end, he'd found something far more precious, a family worth transforming the entire werewolf world to protect. I know you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like and subscribe to this channel for more videos like this. If you have thoughts and observations, do well to drop them in the comments section below.